The stomach was ripped open, the throat was cut. This is how Jack the Ripper, the killer, whose name later became a household name, dealt with his first victim on August 31st, 1888. He, who kept the whole of London in fear, became famous not only for his cruelty, but also for his amazing secrecy. The police never managed to catch him, and only now the researchers were able to lift the veil of secrecy and guess who was hiding under a terrible pseudonym. In the early hours of August 31st, London cabman Charles Cross was driving through the Whitechapel area. Something dark, lying on the side of the road, caught his attention. Coming closer, Cross realized that he had stumbled upon the still warm corpse of an elderly woman. Her throat had been slashed so that her head was barely holding on, and her stomach was ripped open. The detectives who arrived at the scene found the deceased. She turned out to be an elderly prostitute, Mary Ann Nichols. Last night, she couldn't get 4p for a rooming house, and she was thrown out into the street. The case was put on the brakes. Decent people did not go to the poor Whitechapel. The power there belonged to the gangs, and therefore the news of the murder of another prostitute did not impress anyone. A little earlier, the mutilated bodies of Emma Smith and Martha Tabram, also prostitutes, but killed under different circumstances, were found in these slums. The first was subjected to gang rape, and the second was literally cut with a knife. The pathologist counted 39 cut wounds. Soon, however, the detectives had to return to the disadvantaged area. Not far from the place where Nichols was killed, vagrants found the body of another woman, another prostitute with her stomach ripped open and her throat slit. But something distinguished this murder from the previous one. The woman's intestines were thrown over her shoulders, and an autopsy in the morgue showed that after death the uterus was cut out from the victim. The offender formed his signature handwriting. The second consecutive brutal murder caused unrest in the city. It turns out that Scotland Yard has long suspected that a serial killer has wound up in London. It was not only the handwritings. Not far from the corpse they found an envelope with a ring and money. The murderer made it clear that he was committing a crime not out of self-interest, but for other motives. 3 detective constables were involved in the investigation at once: Frederick Aberline, Henry Moore, and Walter Andrews. The day after the latest Whitechapel murder, the Star newspaper had a small piece on the front page with a huge headline: "Great New Whitechapel Murder." Other publications instantly picked up the sensation. Someone spread the rumor that the murders were part of Jewish witchcraft rituals. The fact is that a significant part of the population of the region was made up of Jews, refugees, and immigrants who fled from the pogroms that took place in the Russian Empire. London was gripped by similar anti-Semitic unrest. Under public pressure, the police arrested John Pieser, a Polish Jew who was considered a suspect in the first murder. But the man had an ironclad alibi at the time of the commission of both crimes, and he was soon released. On September 27th, the Central News Agency received a letter addressed to the director: "Dear Chief, I hear from all sides that they have already seized me, but they cannot take me. I will not stop cutting them until they catch me. You will hear from me soon." The postscript read, "Hold this letter until I do something else." Then you print, "You're Jack the Ripper." Jack did not keep waiting long, and 3 days later, on the night of September 30th, he committed another, now double murder, again attacking street prostitutes. The mutilated bodies of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were found quickly. They were on parallel streets, and the medical examiner found that Eddowes had been killed less than 10 minutes before her body was found. The offender was clearly in a hurry and was alarmed. This was indicated by the fact that the damage on Stride's corpse was limited to a cut throat. But the second victim was more disfigured than before. Jack disfigured her face, completely removed the intestines and wrapped it around her right shoulder, cut out the kidney. All this took him 3 to 5 minutes. Then the maniac fled from possible pursuers along the alleyways, in which he was clearly well versed, managed to wash his hands and a knife in a tank of rainwater, and also wrote a provocative inscription with chalk on the wall of one of the houses: "Jews are not accused of all crimes in vain." Confirmation of authorship was part of the bloody apron of one of the victims. The next morning, all the newspapers in London printed the letter of Jack the Ripper and the terrible notes of numerous reporters. The panic that already gripped the city took on paranoid forms. Adding fuel to the fire was a postcard of Cheeky Jackie, which was also published the day after the murder. In it, the maniac allowed himself to be sarcastic. "As you can see, I'm not joking. I think you've all heard about my new job." The first managed to squeak. It was not possible to finish her off with one blow. "Thank you for printing the letter, as I asked you. You are my good helpers." But it soon turned out that the investigation had its first witness. A cab driver passing by during one of the murders remembered the general features of the killer: tall, strong build, long brown hair. After that, he lamented that he did not see the face of the Ripper, because on the street, as luck would have it, the lanterns were not lit. And while prostitutes were afraid to go out into the street and doctors locked their bags in safes, the pathologist Frederick Brown said that the killer might be a doctor, since you can quickly cut out a kidney in the dark if you only know where it is. The police staged a massive raid to Whitechapel. The result of the raid was disappointing. Several smugglers, pickpockets, and robbers fell into the hands of the law. But the Ripper remained at large. The arrests continued. In October 1888 alone, the police interrogated more than 2,000 and arrested 80 people. But the investigators did not come close to solving the problem. London was waiting for a new murder. The tense calm was broken by a letter received on October 15th by George Lusk, a member of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a group of volunteers who patrolled the area. The message read, "Letter from Hell. Mr. Lusk, sir. I am sending you half of a kidney that I took from one of the women and saved for you. I fried the other half and ate it. It tasted delicious. I'll send you the bloody knife I used to carve her if you wait any longer. Try to stop me, Mr. Lusk." But the signature Jack the Ripper was not in the letter, and it was written with numerous errors. Therefore, the falsification was quickly figured out. There were many such attempts to impersonate a maniac, sending letters on his behalf. Probably, some newspapermen tried to raise the sales of their publications in this way. But there were no new murders, so the public calmed down a little. And on November 9th, 1888, the news of the torn body of another girl again shocked London and the surrounding area. The victim's name was Mary Janet Kelly. A young, unlike the rest of those killed, red-haired Irish prostitute rented a room in a guest house. The hostess saw her for the last time alive. The day before, at 2 o'clock in the morning, Mary went with some respectable gentleman to her apartment. The hostess remembered that the man was all in black, a thick gold chain hung on his waistcoat, and long brown hair could be seen from under his hat. The next morning the landlady knocked on Mary's door. She was collecting rent that day, but the lock was not locked. Looking into the room, the hostess screamed in horror and rushed to look for the police. One of the constables, who first arrived on the scene, fainted as soon as he opened the door. The body was mutilated beyond recognition. The chest was cut off, the internal organs were removed and scattered around the room. The face was cut into pieces. The muscles of the thighs were separated from the bones. On the same day, the chief of the city police, Charles Warren, resigned. Policemen were brought to London from the nearest settlements because the streets were patrolled around the clock. 143 detectives arrived in the British capital to help colleagues find at least some evidence. But all was in vain. Some law enforcement officers began to count on a new murder, hoping that one day the maniac would be guaranteed to make a mistake. But everything was quiet, and a couple of months later, Scotland Yard issued an official and completely unconvincing statement. Jack the Ripper either committed suicide or went crazy and was locked up in a lunatic asylum for life. Beast personality. The mystery of the identity of the killer still haunts researchers. Already in the 20s of the last century, communities of ripperologists began to appear. Associations of journalists, historians, detectives, and others interested in unraveling the mystery of the Ripper. They collected scattered facts and conspiracy theories. For example, in 1959, the publicist William Looku published the book Things I Know About. The author claimed that in his youth he came to Russia after the February Revolution and became friends with the chairman of the provisional government, Alexander Kerensky. Therefore, he allowed the journalist to delve into the secret archives. There, he came across the diaries of the elder Grigory Rasputin, close to Nicholas II, in which it was written that the real name of Jack the Ripper was Alexander Petachenko, and he was sent to England by royal intelligence to sabotage the trust of the British in the police. Having completed the task, Petachenko returned to his native Tver, but was subsequently shot. This isn't the only crazy theory the ripperologists have come up with. The Whitechapel murders have been attributed to Vincent van Gogh. They say the painting Irises is actually the outline of the corpse of Mary Kelly, and even to the writer Lewis Carroll. The accusation against the writer of Alice in Wonderland was based on Carroll's similar handwriting to the man who called himself Jack the Ripper in his letters. However, it is still unknown whether the killer was the real author of these messages. Fortunately, no one paid much attention to such statements. But when history professor Thomas Stoll put forward his own hypothesis about the identity of the Ripper, there was a real scandal. In 1962, he published an article claiming that the Duke of Clarence, the grandson of Queen Victoria, was responsible for the murders. Confirmation of this Stoll allegedly accidentally discovered in the personal records of the Queen's doctor. The Duke's crimes were motivated by the birth of a bastard child by a Whitechapel beggar, and to cover up one murder, the murder of a child, 5 more were committed. Stoll's information was supported by his authority, so the representatives of Buckingham Palace had to officially refute his words. This only added fuel to the fire. But soon the journalists, who began to check the facts presented in the article, found out that on September 30th, 1888, the day of the double murder, the prince was at his father's birthday party in Scotland. There are many testimonies and confirmations of this. An interesting study was conducted by forensic scientist Ian Finlay. He studied the genetic material and handwriting from Jack's letters and came to the conclusion that the killer was a woman. Finlay even gave a name, Mary Piercy. She was convicted and hanged for the murder of her lover's wife. The girl cut the opponent's throat from ear to ear, which, according to the medical examiner, proves her involvement in the Whitechapel massacre. But the two most plausible theories about the identity of the Ripper involve Sir John Williams and Aaron Kosminski. The first was a famous London surgeon. Journalist Leonard Mathers suspected him after the killing stopped. He found out that Williams had been practicing for a long time at a clinic on Harley Street, which was located near Whitechapel. He frequently aborted the local prostitutes, wore black, and had a tremendous knowledge of anatomy. Immediately after the last murder, Williams hastily moved to Wales, where he founded the National Library. The surgeon died in 1926. In 2001, his descendant Tony, studying the archives of an ancestor, found a record that he had an abortion for Mary Kelly, the last victim of a maniac, and all pages with records for 1888 were torn out, despite the fact that all the rest were preserved in excellent condition. Another proof of the surgeon's guilt was a 30-centimeter surgical knife and fragments of female wombs preserved in alcohol. Tony considers the infertility of Sir John's wife to be the motive for committing the crime. He could take revenge on the prostitutes who asked him to have an abortion for his grief and inability to become a father. Kosminski, by contrast, was one of the prime suspects from the very beginning of the official investigation. Aaron was a nearly impoverished Polish Jewish immigrant who suffered from hallucinations and fits of rage. But the constables did not find strong evidence against him, so Kosminski remained at large. 6 months after the fifth murder, he was forcibly sent to a psychiatric hospital with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, where he spent the rest of his life. New evidence of his guilt was found already in this century. First, Dr. Jari Louhelainen, an expert in the field of DNA, analyzed the biomaterials that remained on Catherine Eddowes' shawl. The doctor compared the found DNA samples with samples of the descendants of Kosminski and announced that they matched 99.2%. However, Louhelainen's findings have not been peer-reviewed by other scientists or researchers. In addition, in the mental hospital, Kosminski spoke mostly in his native language, Yiddish. He did not know English well, which means he could not convince English-speaking victims to go with him into dark alleys, since it was assumed that the Ripper did just that. Perhaps someday there will be new clues and evidences in the case of the uncaptured killer, and we will know who was hiding behind the mask of Jack the Ripper. Thanks for watching to the end. Subscribe to the channel and like this video if you haven't done it yet. Also, turn on notifications on our channel to catch all new videos. Bye.